Good morning, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 21st of October 2023. I had a good night's sleep last night. I had a lie-in today. This is why I am late. My boy is not, the football game's not on. I feel good. Life is better. So let's go. Well, it's not better for a lot of people, as you can see from this general staff, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. 790 personnel lost. Just remember, these are all human beings, but my goodness, they are human beings that are being used by the Russian war machine for no particular gain, I think. 16 tanks, 55 armoured personnel vehicles. So there is still a lot to be said about Avdiivka. I was listening to Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night. He was saying he is still geolocating vehicles that were lost on the 10th. That is 11 days ago. There's still footage coming out. He's trying to compile all the geolocated equipment that was lost in the Avdiivka area on his maps over, and be able to do them by day. And the numbers are just phenomenal. They are phenomenal. And he did his whole video on the Avdiivka, pretty much on the Avdiivka, and what you call it, military harikiri of the Russians as they're just sending their equipment in to get destroyed. And he even maps the direction and the pathway that the vehicles are taking and goes in to do it 3D. So you're actually first person view almost, going along the map saying, well, they're driving along here, they can't see anything, they're just driving, bang. And another thing that actually the Russians have successfully mine cleared in the area. So there are fields that have no more mines anymore. How have they successfully mine cleared it? By driving their vehicles into the mines. There are no mines left because they've blown up their vehicles on the mines. It's quite incredible. You might think that a dozen days of absolutely insane statistics is completely unrealistic. But when you actually survey the footage that is coming out of Avdiivka, it's not unrealistic. This is just an insane place. So anyway, 16 tanks, 55 armoured personnel vehicles, 5 artillery systems. Okay, that is interesting because that's way down on what we have seen. 4 drones, and then 21 vehicles and fuel tanks, 5 pieces of special equipment. So the story this tells is that there is heavy fighting. Artillery might have been attrited to a point where they're struggling to find targets in certain areas, but yeah, there's a lot of APV losses, a lot of tank losses, and troop losses are high as well. So let's see if we can justify those figures from the Ukrainian general staff. Well, yesterday there were 2 releases of figures from Andrew Perpetua, who has been counting as a mapper counts up the vast numbers of equipment that he sees on the huge numbers of videos and imagery he surveys on a daily basis. So this is the first one from yesterday that I missed out, I think, on yesterday's video. And as you can see, it is a huge loss for the Russians. That's got to be a 5-to-1 ratio at least there. What do we learn from this? Well, IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, they are being thrown. BMP 2s, 3s, and BTRs being thrown into the fray at Avdiivka particularly. And this is what the video footage suggests. They are just losing these hand over fist. Quite a few bits of surveillance and comms, a few bits of artillery. But that's mainly that. For the Ukrainians, a piece of electronic warfare systems, so on and so forth. That is a huge loss from, as I say, from yesterday. And then we have what came out. So that was 18 hours ago. Then we have this one, which is from this really early morning, my time now. So sort of, I don't know, 6 hours ago, 5 hours ago. And this is approaching parity a lot more, probably 1.5 to 1 ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. And again, a large number of IFVs and APCs, MRATs, but quite a few tanks thrown into this one. Range of tanks from T80s, T72s down to unknowns as well. Range of T82s or T8, a couple of T80s. Sorry, range of T80s is what I meant. And yeah, also a plane, and we'll talk about that in a little while. That's a military cargo plane. Quite a few Ukrainian losses here, including a Mi-8. I don't know about that, and a few boats. But then quite a few tanks thrown in there as well. And that is a heavy day for tank losses for the Ukrainians. So it'd be interesting to see where that is from, where those losses are predominantly from, what part of the front line. So that is a heavier day of losses for the Ukrainians. However, it's still far less, or somewhat less at least, than the Russian losses. Okay, now let's go and get an idea of what's still going on in the Avdiivka area. Here's some doom posting. Fascinating levels of doom, says Dimitri from War Translated. We'll see what this Russian source says. Judging by the latest information, we are now wasting our mobile formations in attempts to break into the enemy's defences in Avdiivka. These units, as well as the ammunition for them, have been accumulated and equipped since the winter. This is interesting. So this has been a long-term goal. It's been planned for some time. Using equipment accumulated since last winter. I mean, that's 10 months ago now. That is a really interesting nugget of information. And if there is no success in the near future, it turns out the formations will be wasted. Absolutely. But the enemy still has operational reserves, and the logistics line is much shorter than ours. You've got to remember that logistics for the Ukrainians is far, far easier, given that they're fighting in their own country. The logistics lines behind them is much easier than logistics lines behind the Russians. The presence of such units will allow them to carry out an offensive with a breakthrough of the front and access to operational space. Judging by the enemy's video recordings, we have already lost no less equipment than they did during the entire summer campaign near Robotna. I'd say the Russians have lost far, far more. So there is no less than. Let's read between the lines a little bit there, because it's far more than. And if they initially did not intend to hit with all their might, but only imposed local activity all summer, then the plan is quite workable. Over the summer, exchange our trained and active units for their infantry, which is easier with mobilization reserve, permanent mobilization, hello. Prevent formations from recovering over summer, keep the entire area under tension, and constantly grind down the trained corps. I see only one way out of Avdiivka. Don't throw in a new battalion every day with the expectation that, well, these ones will definitely hook in now, but stop and think. These are echoes of the... Oh, thank you very much. These are echoes of the tactics of the First World War and meat grinds. It's always nice to get a cup of tea delivered when you're not expecting it. I still had half a cup of tea left, eh? We can afford to hammer their first and second lines for a week, not allowing rotations and supplies. During this time, establish communication, which again does not exist, and interaction. This is provided that we need Avdiivka itself like air. If anyone was inspired by Wagner and the operation in Bakhmut, then remember the amount of iron that was rained down on the enemy's head every day, and that level of organization and interaction. We have enough iron to bury Avdiivka, not for one PR day of artillery strikes, but for weeks and months. If you can't take it with precision, take it with mass. We'd rather build new cities than dig graves. If you can't break through a wall with your head, try to think with your head, otherwise you might break it. Loads of interesting ideas coming in here. Not least the idea that the claim is they've got enough ammunition to absolutely flatten Avdiivka like they did Bakhmut. And this is going back to, well, the way we took Bakhmut was through a lot of interaction, a lot of moving parts, a lot of people, a lot of elements, but mainly a lot of artillery raining down on Bakhmut. And that was certainly true in the earlier stages of Bakhmut, where some of these places like Kadema to the east of Bakhmut were flattened, and that was how the Russians were able to take them, just massively overwhelm them with artillery. But we're now a year on from there, right? We're now a year on from the idea that the Russians really do have that amount of A, ammunition, but B, artillery pieces, given how much counter-battery fire they are claiming they don't have, right? So given how much degradation of the Russian capabilities that we are seeing on a day-to-day basis in the figures that are released. So I don't know that it's correct for this guy to say, well, look, we can take Avdiivka just by flattening it. I'm not sure that they are in a position to do that in the way that they did do with Bakhmut. So interesting. I mean, there's this understanding from this source, at least, of the successful approach of the Ukrainians. Whether that was actually what the Ukrainians planned on doing, swapping. Like, the idea from this Russian is that they swap their mobilized infantry for the Russians' well-trained infantry. I'm not sure that's ever particularly been the case. I think Russians have had 4 levels of infantry in a whole host of places. But nonetheless, this is some serious doom posting, as Dmitry said. And there's another one, a quick update from Avdiivka. Last night, the Russians got so effed that they had to pause the offensive. Since this morning until now, we have already effed 4 of their tanks and stopped counting BMPs and infantry. It's not yet evening, said the fighter. So this is from Osman, who's a fighter in the area. That's like they've stopped counting APVs. So look, when you see 55 APVs destroyed, so his unit has taken out 4 tanks. I presume that's just his unit in that area. We've taken out 4 tanks and we've stopped counting the APVs. There's just so many of them that we don't even know how many we've destroyed. And it's not yet evening. Just incredible. And this is a Russian source. Avdiivka is a nightmare. It is difficult to convey in words what is happening in the Avdiivka direction, but there is a real horror there. A few days ago, there were the first large-scale attempts to take Avdiivka, Terikon, so that's a slag heap, but they were unsuccessful. Yesterday, there was a new breakout attempt, and again, big losses. However, I have to say that, so this is from yesterday afternoon. Maps is claiming that the Russians have taken the Terikon, the slag heap. I have not seen that from any other sources, so I'd take that with a grain of salt. Quote: the generals knew that Putin would come and decided to give him a gift. I mentioned this yesterday. We've been fighting for Avdiivka since the 14th. We tried to take the Terikon to cut off the supply. They've been fighting for it for the 14th, actually. We tried to take the Terikon to cut off the supply, but alas, the gift did not work out. There are a lot of dead. We can't even count, an officer working at the headquarters of the Russian forces in Rostov tells us. According to the interlocutor in Donetsk, the wounded and dead are no longer admitted to hospitals and morgues. They're simply nowhere. Quote, we stormed in vehicles, lost dozens of units, and there were few wounded left after the hits, says the source. Just preliminary, about 40 armoured vehicles were lost yesterday. There's a Russian source saying 40 armoured vehicles lost there yesterday. And I don't know whether this is Avdiivka as a whole, whether this is just around the Terikon area or whatever. But either way, this is bad. It's the idea that Putin was going to Rostov for a meeting, more on that later, and that this was supposed to be a gift, but it's been a massive loss. And that there are just so many dead, they're not even counting them anymore. There are no morgues or hospitals to be able to process that amount of loss, that amount of casualties. Just incredible. Anyway, and I am pro-Ukrainian, right? So this is going to be painted in a real pro-Ukrainian way. But you've got Russian and Ukrainian sources stating this. You've got geolocated evidence of all these losses, and you've got more videos you can poke a hairy stick at showing this. I mean, yes, I'm pro-Ukrainian, but all of the evidence is pointing to this is happening in Avdiivka, and the Russians are taking one hell of a beating. So here's a video. I mean, I could show you so many videos, but I can't really because I get demonetized. But these are linked in the description below. SSO at work near Avdiivka. There's destruction everywhere. I mean, this is absolutely true. There is destruction everywhere. There's just smoking stuff. This was really interesting. This was an APC pushing another APC, and the theory is, and again, just look just this one shot. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 destroyed vehicles. Most of those are probably APCs, but that's a tank by the looks of it. And then you've got 2 more, and that might be 1 just behind it as well, and might be even 2 behind it. So that in that image, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, possibly 7 destroyed vehicles. And you've got this one doesn't seem to be working. It's being pushed. Why is it being pushed? The theory is it's being pushed so that it is a mine clearer. So this one gets blown up on a mine. or at least if there are mines, this is like the sacrificial one. As the frames go on here, what happens is there's a massive explosion here, right in the middle of the two. Can't quite tell whether it's a mine or ATGM or something, but probably a mine, and it doesn't get triggered by the initial pressure of these tires. But there's no way either of those things exploded, survived. There is just so much destruction all around, and these videos are 10 a penny. You know, there are plenty of these that you can look at. Here's another one, which is a montage. It doesn't show all of these things. The SB Unit A showed a compilation footage of their work in the Avdiivka and southern direction. And they've claimed to have destroyed 20 tanks, 42 APVs, 21 artillery systems, 2 air defense systems, 96 cars, 6 boats, 2 Muron surveillance complexes, 157 fortifications, and 10 warehouses. That is some serious work from one unit. Now, although not all of that is shown in that video, you get a sense of the work they are doing. And then another video here, this is by the Terracon. Just, again, you look at one frame of this and you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 vehicles. I think this one might be driving, but it's driving past these other 7 vehicles, which are a mix of tanks. And, you know, there's a truck that this IFV is driving past, and just some insanely massive explosions. Just incredible stuff. There's another bit of footage that was pretty viral yesterday, which was a TOS-1A. This is a thermobaric piece of artillery, self-propelled artillery. It's one that fires the thermobaric missiles that pulverize humans, basically, with the pressure and the heat. Really horrific munitions, these. This gets hit by a first-person view drone. I can't show it to you, but it is linked below, as I say. Go and watch it. What an explosion. And it just goes to show how terrific, terrible, you know, in that sense of the word, how terrible the explosions of these munitions must be. Because, goodness me, when a vehicle carrying a bunch of those goes up, it goes up. Now, Justin Bronk from the Royal United Services Institute says, great to see TOS-1A is a particularly horrendous weapon in terms of the effects of large thermobaric barrages have on dug-in troops and urban areas. This is the important bit, and there isn't a huge number of them, one fewer today. This constant degradation, every day, the Russian capability is lessened. And I really do think, and I don't know whether I'm just being overly optimistic, but I do think this counteroffensive has been really successful. Now, not if you're looking at a map. It's not been hugely successful looking at a map. But once they stood back and went, and actually part of the success of this counteroffensive isn't the Ukrainian counteroffensive, it's what the Russians have done themselves in Avdiivka. Because they appear to have been stockpiling weapons and ammunition, have absolutely wasted it to no viable gains. And all the while on the southern front line and in Crimea and along Kherson and elsewhere, the degradation of the Russian forces and equipment has just been incredibly beneficial to the Ukrainians. But they might not have taken serious amounts of land this time round, but if they can gather themselves for the next counteroffensive, they are going to be in a much better position to make advances. If that's or they just keep grinding while stockpiling. But it's the same kind of end result, right? Let me know what you think. Tatragami talks about, again, the ATACMS attacks on Berdyansk and Luhansk. There is more to be said. So this is with reference to Geoconfirmed, who is a great... actually, I think it is a Twitter handle. It's a kind of organization of Geoconfirmers, but it uses Geoconfirm people who are doing OSINT sources who are doing geoconfirmation, and then it kind of assimilates, I think, a lot of it and does stuff itself. So anyway, recently there's been some debate surrounding the extent of damage to Russian helicopters at Berdyansk and Luhansk airfields, sparked by Geoconfirmed statements. So we heard that, first of all, there were 9 destroyed at Berdyansk and 5 at Luhansk. And then that went down to 6 at Berdyansk, but then other people say, actually, no, looks like more. And Geoconfirm's come out and said there were at least 21 Russian helicopters that were either destroyed or damaged. This is on the much higher end, and these guys are really good. Like that's a real reputable source. So it's not like some pro-Ukrainian. That is people who only make claims once they're geoconfirmed. So Tatrugami says, while their number slightly exceeds our team's public estimate, it's important to note that their estimate is based on solid ground. So that's kind of what I'm saying. The challenge arises from the limitations of commercially available imagery. So when you're doing open source intelligence gathering, you are relying on oftentimes low resolution quality satellite imagery. It's not the best quality. You have to pay a lot of money. Either you pay a lot of money to get good quality, or you have to have access to military grade satellite imagery. Anyway, he continues. So the challenge arises from those limitations, which do not provide the resolution needed to detect hundreds of small scorch marks around helicopters in Berdyansk. In the case of Luhansk Airport, it's much easier since you can clearly see it from our higher resolution imagery purchased from Planet Labs. That's a point. So, it depends on the weather in the area. It depends on the type of imagery. It depends when the imagery was taken. Was it taken after they removed some helicopters? All these variables are involved in trying to work out exactly what happened and, the quality of the imagery. However, we can independently verify that multiple scorch marks from explosions are clearly visible around Mi-8 helicopters on imagery from non-commercial distribution. Someone's obviously got access to other imagery. Unlike most Ka-52 helicopters, which were burned and destroyed, the Mi-8s likely didn't carry ammunition that would cause explosions. Consequently, the damage might not be easily visible from the satellite or visible at all. We opted not to incorporate these helicopters into our report because while we recognize the possibility of their damage, there are no publicly available means to definitively substantiate it. Nevertheless, it's worth noting that even based on images from Russian Telegram channels, link included in the image description, one can observe multiple holes on the affected helicopter, suggesting that many helicopters sustained damage even if they did not catch fire. We're going to return to this helicopter in a second. So you can see shrapnel, loads of holes. There's literally like someone's actually drawn all the circles around all the holes, and then you've got two massive holes in the windscreen in the cockpit there. But so this wouldn't have been counted as a loss. You got a much bigger hole there. So anyway, it's also worth noting that these helicopters are not in flyable condition. To transport them, the Russians had to remove their rotor blades, and we talked about that yesterday, a process typically done to prepare helicopters for ground transportation. This observation makes the claim of damage highly plausible, which is why Geoconfirmed likely included them and reached a total number of 21, linked to their investigation there. So you can go and check that out yourself. But to confirm this, you've got Russian Telegram channels saying this. Right, and again, this is, if you're pro-Ukrainian, this is great news, right? After a recent attack on one of the airfields, the only one not destroyed was Kashka with our favorite sticker. So this is the only one not destroyed, is the claim. The two Ka-52 standing next to each other will never fly again. So that's referring to two other particular Ka-52s. And here, change the glass, a little electrical tape, and you continue to invigorate the Ukrainian with whirlwinds. The technicians are already working. So this is that again sort of confirms that there were wide-scale losses there. And indeed, Russian propagandists discussing the strikes on Luhansk and Berdyansk with ATACMS say, quote, there was practically nothing left undamaged, they say gloomily, and predict more strikes. So that's interesting. The Russians themselves are publicly admitting that pretty much everything was at least damaged. There you go. And in other kind of lost news, border guards destroyed an attack aircraft on the Bakhmut flank. I have no other details about this. Quote, enemy forces tried to capture the stronghold of the border unit. Our fight to stop the invaders with fire. The combat vehicles were destroyed. The remnants of the infantry that managed to escape were covered by the border mortars, the message reads. So, yeah, bit of a vague claim, but there could be another aircraft loss. And talking about aircraft losses, we have this. And this was doing the rounds yesterday. You can see that's not in a good way. Another military plane crash for Russia. An Il-76 caught fire during takeoff from the Gisar airfield in Dushanbe, capital of Tajikistan. An engine of the huge transporter plane caught fire and slid off the runway. No injuries reported. Lack of maintenance could be to blame. I mean, that is not a good look. Be interesting to see whether they were transporting ammunition or stuff that the Russian army needed on the front lines, whether that was for their war efforts. I don't know. I have no idea. But of course, if that was for their war efforts, that ain't getting to the front line in any hurry at the moment and could well be damaged beyond use. But nonetheless, let's move on. So, finally, for this section, Russia on fire. Spate of fires at public buildings in Yekaterinburg recently. Yesterday, the under construction ice arena suffered its second fire in 2 months, while this evening the expo centre started burning. Officials say refrigeration equipment caught fire. I mean, that's not good news again, is it, for the Russians? Much needed tea break. Right, okay. So moving on to distant strikes, and there's not much information coming out at the moment, but I think there were quite a few strikes last night from the Russians. Tim White says Russia used new tactics to hit Ukraine overnight with a simultaneous launch of cruise and then anti-aircraft missiles. So 9 missiles and 39 air bombs were directed at Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Donetsk, Kherson regions. At least 1 person died and 2 wounded. So wide-scale attack there. I don't know if he means here 9 cruise missiles and 39 surface-to-air missiles, or whether he means aviation bombs, 39 KAB or FAB 500 bombs. I don't know. But not much detail coming out at the moment other than some footage from here. This is Michael McKay talking about, and quite a few people have talked about this school hit in Konstantinivka, Donetsk region, as well as 6 multi-story apartment buildings. They used S-300 surface-to-air missiles reconfigured to strike ground targets. He claims those are war crimes. I've talked about these before. These are less accurate but harder to shoot down, so that's why they use them. That is, whether there were any military personnel in any of these places, it's hard to know. And Tim White continues, so many attacks on Kherson, more aerial bombs. This probably is the FAB 500. Have just been launched at the region, monitors say, and air sirens are switched on again. Here are photos of the damage from the previous attack a couple of hours ago. So lots of damage being done to predominantly civilian-looking areas. Tim White also says, going the other way, that Melitopol has been hit again. A loud blast was heard throughout the occupied city in Zaporizhia Oblast. It happened in the northern suburbs. Details are not yet known, but a lot of army activity has been evidenced since the explosion, apparently. And then finally in this section, again, Tim White says, in occupied... I should get Tim White on again for another live with him. I've done 3 or 4 with him before. You can check. They might be a bit outdated now in the live tab. In occupied Crimea, the invaders launched a smokescreen as air raid sirens wailed and explosions were heard. Russia says all objects were taken down. Pops were heard in Zhankoy, Sevastopol and Balaklava. They also say rockets were fired on southern Kherson region. So activity in Crimea as you would expect. Still, it's interesting that we haven't heard of any more ATACMS being used, whether they have not enough of them such that they want to use them really sparingly, but they have been promised a continued supply. It's interesting. One of the theories, I think Jake Bro has put this forward, is that the continuous supply might be on the drawdown of ATACMS. So ATACMS are being replaced, pretty much in the process of being replaced, and that could be why they've been given a go-ahead, because the new replacement missile, the PRSM, the precision munition that's going to replace them, is just being built. And I think it might be, and it sounds plausible, that the Ukrainians might receive as many missiles per month as the Americans can make their new missile. They say, we've made 20 this month, here's 28 ATACMS. That's how they might get this continual supply. There are claims that the ATACMS that have been provided so far were literally out of date ATACMS. They are beyond their kind of supposed use by date. So that's also going to be a variable in calculated into why the US has decided to give Ukraine these missiles. I mean, they literally aren't supposed to be usable, or at least not advised to be used, because they might degrade. So they might need some bit of upkeep before they are sent, before they're used. Right, going on to other bits and pieces. Trentelenko here says, is barely... This is a really good point. Barely registered anywhere. Ukraine winning isn't as good a clickbait story for the international media as Russia winning is. This is so true. Right. So, Vuhledar did get a bit of traction. Avdiivka, this is really newsworthy. Russia, I've just spent quite a long time talking about the massive losses in Avdiivka. This is a huge success for the Ukrainians, like a huge success. The number of pieces of equipment that the Russians have lost in 12 days is phenomenal. Why is that not Frontline news report? Okay, you got Hamas and Israel and etc. etc. But in terms of reporting the Russia-Ukraine war, why is it that when Russia do something that is bad for Ukraine, that gets splurged all over the front pages, and when Ukraine do something good or Russia do something particularly harmful to themselves, self-destructive, that's not splurged across the front pages. Crazy how the Russians apparently lost 20 plus helicopters in one night to ATACMS strikes, a massive loss to their rotary wing capability, and it's barely registered anywhere. So we did hear some reports of ATACMS being used, and it was reported, but I don't think it was shouted about as much as when Russia do something, or oh my goodness, the counteroffensive is not going very well. Oh my goodness, when Malatok-Kamachka, when those vehicles were lost at Malatok-Kamachka, and they were shown from 37 different angles by the Russians, the Western mainstream media doom posted that, a lot, and yet the inverse of that, and it kind of comes and goes pretty quickly. I think that there is something to be said about that for sure. Right. I reported this yesterday, how Russian propagandist Solovyev's channel had this chap, Satanovsky, who, this is on my extra video actually, it wasn't in my news piece, so you go and check out my extra. He was slagging off the Maria Zakharova, who is the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or is the Minister for Foreign Affairs, I'm not 100% sure. But she was slagged off by this chap you can see on the screen now as being a drinking scum, as opposed to actually drinking scum. I don't know. Either way, slagged her off, but it was also slagged off Bogdanov, the Deputy Minister of the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry, as receiving Arab money. So this chap that you just saw seemed to be actually siding with Israel there, and slagging off some of the Russian politicians. Well, anyway, and I talked yesterday in my extra about how fractures are showing in the unity of messaging in the Russian information space. And we've seen elements of that with the Russian mill bloggers, but it's normally directed against military people like Shoigu, Gerasimov, or unknown commanders, or the lack of success on the front line. Whereas this is aimed at specific people who are within the Kremlin structure, right? So now Solovyov has fired his propagandist Satanovsky for the criticism of anti-Semitic talk of Maria Zakharova, spokesperson of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and saying that about Bogdanov. So the video contains the criticism of Zakharova and Solovyev's apologies to her and Bogdanov. Russian propaganda is getting glitchy. And this basically goes to what I was saying yesterday. This is just more evidence of fracturing, which is someone saying some stuff that's counterproductive if you're looking from a Kremlin point of view, and then getting sacked for doing so, and then that just shows that it's all a bit of a mess, and that itself is a reflection of how poorly things are going on the front line. If things were going really well on the front line, if everything was going well in the war for Russia, there would be absolutely no fractures. There would be unity. Everyone would be saying how wonderful everything is. There's only fractures when the pressure is mounting because of the lack of success. Okay. Flash News reports 500,000 mines planted on the northern border of Ukraine. That's significant because it's now 16 times better protected than last February. This is this idea of Ukraine is in a much better place now than it was a year ago, a year and a half ago. Just hugely better place. So when you're talking about protection from strikes on energy infrastructure, the air defense is so much better now. Still a lot of improvement to be made, but so much better now than it was a year and a half ago. When you talk about the northern borders and are they going to be attacked by Russia from Belgorod or Kursk? Are they going to be attacked by Belarus from the north? Well, they've got 500,000, 500,000 mines are now along that border. They are in a better place. And it's that asymmetry and that upgrading, degrading, upgrading, degrading, upgrading, degrading to the point where at some point the Ukrainians should be able to take full advantage of that and make the gains that they were hoping for, I guess, in the last counteroffensive. The general also said that the Russians, or I say last, it's still kind of grinding on. The general also said that the Russians reduced the number of their aircraft at the airfields in Belarus. There are 3 Su-30CM combat aircraft and 2 Su-24MR reconnaissance aircraft left involved in air defense. So that again is reflective of something. And finally, Putin went to Rostov headquarters. We're talking about that with regard to why Avdiivka might have been planned for then. In the Rostov headquarters of the Russian army, Putin listened to a report on the situation of the front over an empty map. This is interesting. Like, they're literally talking over a white piece of paper. Some people were talking about how when he left here, he was not smiling at all. And that might reflect that actually things aren't going well for the Russian military, and he is aware of that. Quote, Russia uses secret invisible ink on the maps. Only the chosen ones can see them. The news agency RIA commented, a bit tongue-in-cheek. In reality, this is a sheet with the Russian achievements during the period of Putin's reign. Ouch. So I don't know if that's at all worth taking seriously, but they are appearing to talk over a white piece of paper. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all of your support. You are marvelous. The next video will be out shortly. This has been quite a long one. I do apologize. Take care. Speak soon.